Japan, and current Republican candidate for U.S. Senate in the great state of Tennessee, Bill Hagerty. Ambassador Hagerty, thanks for joining us here on Breitbart News Saturday.
Matt, great to be with you again. I hope you're well.
Yeah, the country is really going through a rough time here with this coronavirus crisis. I think 20% of the country or so is on like a complete lockdown. I mean, we've got New York, Illinois, and California that comprises about 20% of the nation's population under stay-at-home orders. Most of the rest of the country is in a wide-scale shutdown. Hopefully, these very extreme draconian measures are having an impact in terms of containing and stopping the spread of coronavirus, COVID-19. What do you think as we're watching this play out? Is there an end in sight? What is your sense of things on the ground there in Tennessee?
Well, I tell you, man, I'm not sure what you're seeing there in Pennsylvania, but here in Tennessee, we're seeing a significant curtailment of all interpersonal activity, a curtailment of economic activity as well. It's going to be felt broadly across the state, across the nation. One thing I'd like to do, though, before anything else, is just to thank our first responders who are really working overtime right now. That's happening here in Tennessee. I know it's happening around the nation, but our first responders, our doctors, our nurses, the medical professionals that are there, really working heart and soul to make certain that we do the very best we can with the resources that we have available to us. They're doing a great job here in Tennessee, looking after hardworking Tennessee families and trying to keep us as healthy as we possibly can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And also a huge thanks to everybody in the administration and to our state and local officials across the country. And we're seeing a lot of governors, Republicans, Democrats, et cetera, step up and work together, which is a good thing. And hopefully we will get through this as a country. We've faced worse adversaries than this invisible enemy. We will beat this. We will get through it. We will get out the other side, and we will be stronger as a result.
I agree with you, Matt. I mean, this is a tough challenge, but America is stronger than this. We will stand up. We have the capacity to do it, and we will demonstrate that capacity. I'm very certain of it. Certainly is the case here in Tennessee. People are locking arms, and we are pulling together here to address this.
Yeah, so now, Ambassador, the reason why I wanted to have you on, because you're a subject matter expert when it comes to the threat of communist China to the United States and the rest of the world. And we see the media and the left and all these people out there trying to claim that it's racist or xenophobic to I think correctly and accurately put the onus for the cause of this pandemic hitting the world, not just the United States, but Italy, much of the rest of Europe. Many other places around the world are affected by this disease on the communist government in China. I mean, they lied to the World Health Organization. They provided, and the World Health Organization, by the way, willfully printed their lies. They claimed that this disease did not transmit from person to person. The World Health Organization just printed it. It's up there still from January on the World Health Organization's Twitter account. They wouldn't allow Western doctors into and American CDC health officials into Wuhan to handle the response to this. What are your thoughts on China's responsibility here for the spread of this pandemic?
Well, man, I think China has a special responsibility here because they were the first country to experience it. They have an obligation to the rest of the world to make this information available to us immediately and with clarity. They're the first to experience it, but what do? They tried to hide the data. They destroyed samples. They punished the doctors there in China who tried to mention it in the first case. And in all likelihood, they've severely underreported the cases that are present there. I mean, if you think about what they're doing, they're running a public relations campaign, not a public health campaign. And they put control of their communist regime ahead of the lives of their citizens. And by the way, ahead of the lives and the well-being of everybody in the world now. This has cost lives, and it's cost economic damage on a global basis. So the Chinese have got to be held accountable for this. But the thing that is most frustrating, and we've talked about this before, is them trying to turn the table, trying to blame America now. To say that the virus was originated by America, that's just as far-fetched as anyone could possibly imagine. And then to say that now they're saying that they've conquered it there at home, and they're going to start sending healthcare teams to Italy and other places that are affected by it. And this is just beyond the pale. They are putting public relations ahead of public health at every turn. And I think the worst thing yet that we've seen was China's threatening to withhold life-saving pharmaceuticals from us. I think it's exposed the vulnerability of our supply chains, the fact that we are dependent on China for critical resources like acetaminophen, like penicillin, things like that that are manufactured sole source there in China. But for them to threaten to withhold it, I think has really made the point very clear. We've got to get our strategic supply chains out of China.
Yeah, so that was what you read my mind. That was what I was going to ask about next. Is that okay? So they're threatening to withhold these critical medications from the United States and medical supplies. How do we do that? So the day will come when we beat this public health crisis. The virus is under control. Yes. And I don't know when that day is. I don't know if it's in April, if it's in May, if it's later. But the day will come. What steps do we need to do to bring these supply chains home to the United States and make these things domestically? Because we're the greatest country in the history of the planet. We can make this stuff at home. Why are we making it over there? It doesn't make much sense.
Matt, the first steps are already underway, and this started at the beginning of the Trump administration, when the president came in and began to undertake a significant deregulatory thrust. That began to make the business climate better in America, and we put tax reform through. That brought our corporate tax rates down to something at least competitive. Before this administration, America's tax rate was the least competitive in the world, 35%. Now we've moved our corporate tax rates to 21%. Those steps automatically put the American economy on a growth trajectory that was better than the rest of the world. So what has happened is a lot of companies have already begun to look back to the United States to move their supply chains back in this direction. But we still have a lot of vulnerability. I think what we need to do is continue to work with U.S. companies to get them to move their strategic supply chains back, and particularly when we identify a vulnerability like this in our healthcare system. We've got the best economy in the world. We have rule of law. We have certainty here. And we need to do everything we can to get the products that are consumed here in America made here. I think when I was U.S. Ambassador to Japan, we worked extensively on that. And what we did was we made Japan the number one investor in the United States over the past 3 years, because Japan has been aggressively moving more and more production to the United States. We need to focus on strategic industries and make certain that we don't have this vulnerability to China going forward.
Yeah, so now, particularly, Ambassador, when the relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Abe has been particularly important in confronting this. And President Trump really seems to have taken a lot of steps that have protected us from China in the lead up to this. And I think he's been proven not just correct, but way more than correct. I mean, maybe we should have done a lot more than what he's already been doing. And I think that will accelerate at the end of this crisis in terms of us protecting ourselves from the communist regime in Beijing. But in terms of the relationships that he's built with, whether it be Prime Minister Abe, which I know you were critical in helping establish those relations and building that relationship, but also Prime Minister Modi in India, with other places around the Pacific Rim in the region, President Trump has really it's almost like I don't want to call it like a global coalition, because that's not how Trump rolls, but like it's like an informal global coalition that President Trump has made or developed of relationships with these people around New Zealand. I know Ambassador Scott Brown really well. I was there with him in his Senate campaign in 2014 in New Hampshire, and in Australia with Prime Minister Morrison. But the point is that around the region and around the world, President Trump has been readying us for this for a long time.
He's done an excellent job. As you know, I was very deeply involved in the relationship with Prime Minister Abe. I don't think there's a stronger personal relationship between two national leaders than the one that exists between President Trump and Prime Minister Abe. But I've also been with President Trump and Prime Minister Modi at the same time, too. And you can definitely see a warmth in a relationship there that's very real. That sort of personal relationship is critical, particularly at times like this. That sort of trusting relationship can help us lock arms strategically and address common threats. And India deals with the threat of China every day. They've got a common border. There have been issues there, extensive issues there. And Japan is confronted with China, with North Korea, with Russia in that area on a daily basis as well. We have strong shared strategic interests, and the president has done an excellent job of working with our partners who have similar strategic interests and really trying to get us all pointed and aimed in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. So now, Ambassador, too, one of the things that's I think is one of the really interesting things, while China is threatening to withhold critical medications from us, Taiwan, without question, is just sending us 100,000 masks a week, medical masks, and they're doing all sorts of other things they can to help us. I mean, how critical is Taiwan in this whole equation as well? Because I think that while they're a small island, they are kind of like almost like a beacon of hope in the region in terms of this is what communist China could be if they were an open and honest society and a democracy like Taiwan is.
Yes, well, Taiwan indeed is a beacon of hope, and their most recent elections, I think, underscored the view of their population that they need to stand as a beacon of hope. They've seen what's happened in Hong Kong. Despite mainland China's promises, Hong Kong has really suffered the brunt of a very heavy-handed regime coming in and making, very significant threats to the freedom that those people have enjoyed for many, many decades under British rule and then since 1997 on their own. Taiwan's had an opportunity to see that. And in their most recent set of elections, they've definitely moved in the other direction toward freedom. I think China basically is mainland China again. Is the greatest advertiser, if you will. They underscore the need for freedom more than anyone in the region when you see their behavior and their attitude toward their own people.
Mm-hmm. So now, what are some of the big picture changes when we do get out of the other side of this? We talked about the supply chains, the other things. What are some of the other big picture changes that we see coming with regard to China, assuming you're elected to the U.S. Senate? And I think your chances are really good, Ambassador, because President Trump's endorsed you. I know Donald Trump Jr. was out there campaigning with you not too long ago. What do you think are some of the big picture changes that we need to see from our lawmakers, from our government, from our country, as it pertains to our approach to China?
Well, again, I think one of the biggest differentiators for me is the close relationship I have with the president and this administration. You mentioned the president's endorsement of me, and that is certainly a significant factor, but most important is just the long-standing relationship I've had with him and the folks in the administration to get things done. And I think if I'm fortunate enough to be sent by the people of Tennessee to represent Tennessee in the U.S. Senate, what you'll have is an incoming senator who has a set of relationships, some strong working relationships with people throughout the administration to get important strategic objectives accomplished. When we think about the strategic objectives relative to China, I think having a voice in the United States Senate that understands the threat that China poses to us is going to be very significant. I've dealt with China on a daily basis. When I was based in Japan, we had the most immediate threat probably with North Korea. They launched intercontinental ballistic missiles over Japan. Mm-hmm. They detonated a hydrogen bomb. The tension in Japan was enormous at that point because Japan is the only nation in the world that's been on the receiving end of a nuclear weapon. So those sort of concerns, those sort of issues were immediate and near term while I was serving as ambassador. But China has been the most significant long-term threat. When you think about what they're doing in the South China Sea, Matt, it really is concerning. President Xi stood in the Rose Garden with President Obama back in 2015 and said that China had no intent to militarize the islands in the South China Sea. What have they done since then? They've gone out and crushed coral reefs. They've pumped millions of tons of concrete into the ocean, and they built up very significant strategic military assets there with runways, with turrets, fully armed. They've gone in with the Belt and Road Initiative, and they've tried to extend their reach, putting critical infrastructure throughout the most important trading lanes in the region. With Sri Lanka, they built an important strategic deep water port. They put so much debt on it, we call it debt trap diplomacy, dealing with China, that the Sri Lankan government could not afford the debt. They foreclosed on that now. And what China has is a very strategic port now, a deep water port right there, is a strategic location in the South China Sea in Sri Lanka. They speak Chinese there at the port. They operate under Chinese law. This is the type of approach that China has used. And then if you think about what they look to in the future, they have been very aggressive on the 5G front. And 5G, I'm sure most of your listeners know this, but 5G is the next generation of telecommunications and global communications infrastructure that needs to come into play. That infrastructure will have our energy grid tied to it. To the extent we have autonomous vehicles, those autonomous vehicles will rely on the 5G network to communicate with one another. It'll also house all kinds of data transmission. Can you imagine having China, Chinese-sponsored companies, Chinese-subsidized companies, embedded in our 5G system? That infrastructure is very strategic and something that we're going to have to protect. The president has taken very clear action to keep companies like Huawei out of the United States 5G infrastructure. And to step back for a minute, Huawei is a huge company backed by the communist regime in China. They have 190,000 employees. This is the size of an apple in the United States. 190,000 employees backed by the balance sheet of the Chinese government. A strategic asset in China's mind, no doubt. They're manufacturing 5G equipment, and they're trying to bring it in at very, very cheap prices. And with the type of subsidy that takes place, given the government backing of that industry, they have frozen out competition from companies in America, companies in Japan, companies in other places. The leadership that the president is taking is to block Huawei and similarly situated Chinese companies from America's 5G architecture. I worked very hard with Japan to get them to do the same thing. So now we've got the largest economy in the world, America, and the third largest economy in the world, which is Japan, are both now free and clear from Huawei's contamination of that 5G market. You mentioned Scott Brown in New Zealand. He's done a great job. New Zealand has now joined us. Australia has joined us. We need to get more like-minded countries, to exclude these Chinese subsidized companies like Huawei from the 5G network. That's how we begin to turn the tide back. That's how we address the strategic threat that China poses. It's to acknowledge it, it's to call it out, and it's to take significant steps to block it.
The last thing I want to ask you about, Ambassador, too, is so right now the U.S. Senate is negotiating a Phase 3 response package to the economic side of this. We've seen Phases 1 and 2 pass and were signed into law by the president. What are some of the things that you're looking for to address the concerns of people out of work, people that have had cut hours, people that are small businesses, other economic impacts of this crisis that's hit the U.S.? What are some of the things that you think need to be in this bill? And we're waiting to see final text of this Phase 3 thing, which apparently, according to Larry Kudlow at the White House, could be as more than $2 trillion. So what are some of the things that you think need to be addressed to help our economy survive this as we get out of it?
Yeah, Matt, first and foremost, my concern is on hardworking Tennessee families. And those are the people that are being affected by this. I think, in the very first instance, I'm very pleased to see the bill move forward so that we get testing in place, that we get masks and respirators, the type of things that our medical responders need to address the threat. That is critical, and that was the first priority. Beyond that, from an economic standpoint, I want to see something that's going to effectively help Tennessee families who are really subjected to this dislocation. It needs to be short-term, though, Matt. I hate to see anything come in that has any type of permanence. When you create a program in Washington, if you don't sunset it, you don't put a clear time limit on it, it will perpetuate it. And we need not grow government. What we need to do is address the dislocation that's occurring to families here in Tennessee, families there in Pennsylvania. That's what we've got to address, not create a new regulatory regime, not create new government programs that don't have an endpoint. Everything that we do, every step that we make right now is going to be critical to helping our families survive and navigate this, helping small and medium-sized businesses stay afloat as we navigate all of this. But what we've got to do is certainly time limit this so it's specific to the virus itself, and that it doesn't obtain a life of its own. That's one of the greatest concerns I have about any program coming out of Washington.
All right. Well, Ambassador Bill Hagerty, where can people go to learn more about you, get involved in the campaign if they so choose?
Well, I very much appreciate the time again with you and your listeners, Matt. And if you'd be interested, please go to teamhagerty.com. T-E-A-M, Team Hagerty, Hagerty.com for more information. And my social media is Bill Hagerty, TN for Tennessee, Bill Hagerty, TN at the end, the letters T, the letter N, in all social media, whether that's Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, you'll find us there. So I very much appreciate the time with you, Matt, and wish you the best as you're keeping up your social distance there in Harrisburg as we navigate all of this.
All right. Well, Ambassador Bill Hagerty, he's a Republican candidate for U.S. Senate in the great state of Tennessee. Thank you for joining us on Breitbart News Saturday. Again, folks, Breitbart News Saturday here on Sirius XM 125, the Patriot Channel. The number here is 866-95.